Hi there. Karin will be joining us shortly. But hi, everybody. Welcome to the second steering committee meeting for the Eugene Review Panel component of the Eugene Middle Housing Project. As Lynn said, it continues to be a mouthful. We have a couple, at least one person with us today who didn't make it last week. So let's just go around and do another quick round of introductions before we get started. And I will pass it to, we can just do like we did last week, share your name and your organizational affiliation, and we'll popcorn it around. So call on somebody when you finish. And first on my screen here is Jennifer.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Yeh. I'm the city councilor for Ward 4, which is Northeast Eugene, and I'm at work right now, so I'm sorry I have to wear my mask. I'll try to be loud if I need to be.
Great, thanks.
And I'm supposed to call. I'm supposed to call on someone. So the only other person in my screen is Ken. So.
Ken Beeson, Planning Commission. Sophie.
Hi, I'm Sophie McGinley. I'm an assistant planner with the City of Eugene Planning, and I will call on Terry.
Hi, I'm Terry Harding. I'm the principal planner for community planning and design at the City of Eugene. Oh, Lisa.
Lisa Fragola. I am a member of the City of Eugene Planning Commission. How about Heather?
Hi, I'm Heather Solicki. I'm a member of the Human Rights Commission. Ed.
Ed McMahon, Home Builders Association, and Corinne.
Hi everyone, I'm Karin Knudsen, architect and urban designer and director of Better Housing Together. I'm also on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee.
I believe Karen and Lynn haven't gone yet.
I'll go. Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Davis, a program manager for Healthy Democracy, who's responsible for the process.
And I'm Carolyn Jacobs. I am the Neighborhood Leaders Council rep.
Excellent. Thank you all. I always use that exercise with my students of passing it to someone, and it's a nice first cognitive challenge in any meeting to actually remember. So thank you again. For those of you who I didn't meet last week, my name is Alex Ranieri. I'm doing some assistant moderation support work with Healthy Democracy on this project, and I will be facilitating steering committee meetings. So it's great to see all of you again, and we'll dive right in. So I'll give you a brief overview of our agenda for today. First of all, we are going to just finalize those working agreements that we started to talk about last week and kind of formalize a decision-making structure for this group. And then Terry and Sophie are going to walk us through a little bit more of how the review panel fits into the overall public involvement plan for the city's whole middle housing initiative. I know there was some questions about that last week, so we'll clarify those pieces. And then Lynn will give us a quick kind of process overview recap that will launch us into spending most of our time today talking about experts to call in for phase 1 of the panelists' work. So that's where the bulk of our time will be spent. But first, let me share my screen, and I just want to make sure that we all agree to these working agreements, especially those of you who weren't able to join last week. Okay, so this is the same list that we ran through last week. I won't read these again, but just kind of general agreements we're making to each other about how this committee will do its work. The few that have been added were some just Zoom specific protocols. And so those are down here. And I was wondering, You'll see this one says all steering committee participants are panelists in the Zoom call, and those who aren't on the committee will be just attendees, but won't have the ability to speak or use video. And I was wondering if Sophie, you could just clarify, since I know there were some emails going around this morning, wondering about the link and how that process works. If we could use this as a moment to clarify what it means for committee members to be panelists, and kind of how to use the Zoom link that's in that calendar invite. Would that be something you could speak to, Sophie?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. So we are using the Zoom webinar format, which basically just only shows panelists who are speaking in on video. It's unlike a traditional Zoom meeting where you see little tiles for every single person that's in the meeting. And so you were, that process is a little bit more complicated, and you should have each gotten a link, a panelist link that includes a calendar invite from Elena Domingo. She's another planner with Zoom capabilities. And that's the link that we prefer that you use. We understand that it can be pretty frustrating to find old emails in your inbox. And so there's also an attendee link, and that's the one that's being shared with the general public in emails and on the website. And if you click that, you'll come in as an attendee and not have video or be able to speak, but I can upgrade you. So we prefer that you do the other way, but it's not really a problem if you come in as an attendee. And if you ever have any problems with that, you can just send one of us an email and we'll get you upgraded to a panelist.
Great. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Sophie. And as a matter of practice, I can just start to include the link in my weekly emails with the agenda, knowing that the preferred method is to use that initial link that identifies you as a panelist. So great, we have that, and then just a few, what's probably routine for most of us now: use your video if possible, keep yourself muted while you're not speaking, refrain from using the chat feature since this is a public meeting. As a facilitator, I prefer, instead of using the raise hand feature in Zoom, just raising your hand visibly on screen since we're a small group, to add yourself to the queue. And then remembering that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the City of Eugene's page. Okay, so let's see, I'm gonna make it so that I can see all of your faces. And can we just do a thumbs up if you're willing to approve these working agreements, or thumbs middle, thumbs down? Okay, great. I see all your thumbs. Thank you so much. So now to the slightly meatier part of this conversation. Lynn and I thought it would be appropriate to decide on some decision-making structure that this group wants to use, since we're getting to the part of this process where we'll need to make some decisions together. So I thought we would come with a proposal for a decision-making structure that we would recommend for this size of group and this type of process, but this is ultimately up to you all. So I'll just kind of propose this to you, and please feel free to make amendments. We can have some discussion about it if there are other ideas. So here is the proposal. We like to strive for consensus whenever possible in groups such as these, and have found that consensus -1, so one person not fully on board, is a nice balance for striving towards as unanimous agreement as possible, and still being able to move forward even if that isn't 100% agreement. With the caveat of, if there is a decision that comes to two very clear options, and there's a lot of disagreement and we're at a total impasse, just given the amount of time that the steering committee has together, making it possible to just take that to a vote, a simple majority vote. And then for other decisions, oops, I left a word out here, with many options, like what we're going to be doing today with the experts, using kind of a ranking and prioritizing system rather than needing to come to full consensus or consensus -1 on 100 different options, right? So this really mirrors the kind of decision-making systems that we use on things like our review panels as well. So discussion about this before we decide whether to adopt this proposal. Does anyone have questions or thoughts on this piece?
Just to check in, so is consensus -1 meaning 6 out of 7 people need to say yes? Is that how many people are voting?
No, so I believe we have, it's 12 voting members. Is that correct, Lynn?
10? I think it might be, oh, hold on. Let's look at the list of participants here.
Sorry, the number is slipping my mind. I think it's 10, 10 of us. Yeah.
But yes, it includes myself and folks at the city. We're part of this, which is why Alex is kindly facilitating, because so that we can all sort of participate as equal members of this body. So I'm not sure how many that adds up to.
So how many city employees are voting?
Two.
Two, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that we have everyone here today and that this is the full committee. So there are 10 voting members. Consensus -1 would be 9 in strong agreement. Yeah, Terry?
Just a note that we will be adding 2 more to the committee once we have panelists. 2 panelists will join the steering committee.
Thank you. Yeah, that was the missing link in my in my remembering right there. Yep, 10 now, 12 once the panel has begun. Thank you. Karin, did I see your hand?
You did, and it's probably a detailed question, but so consensus -1, that would be if there's a particular proposal on the table. If, for example, there's a proposal that is at consensus minus, say, 2 or 3, whose responsibility is it to generate a proposal that can gain consensus? Is that the responsibility of the 3 who are not at consensus to bring back something to the group, or the large group to, toss ideas until consensus might be reached?
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm not sure if it's necessarily the model that I've used with other healthy democracy projects. I think usually the generating proposals stage is done collaboratively as much as possible, and then that's kind of negotiated as those small tweaks are made. Would you agree with that, Lynn?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everybody needs to be involved in that, but it is also incumbent on the people that may be not feeling good about a particular direction that something's going to be extra involved in helping figure out, how we can get to some negotiated solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other thoughts about this, or particularly any misgivings about this proposal? Yeah.
So I'm just sorry, just to understand. So there's 4 paid staff members who are getting equal votes. Is that right? No.
So there are 2 city staff. Oh, sorry. Do you want to take that, Terry?
I was just going to clarify that only 1 Healthy Democracy staff person is voting, and Alex is facilitating.
Yes. Right. Thank you. Right. So I am purely facilitator for this group, not a voting member. So we have Lynn, Heather, or Lynn, Terry, and Sophie as voting members. Thank you. Ken, did I see your hand?
You did. With respect to the discussion on the decision-making structure, I think where I was going with it, if we don't have the reach consensus, I was thinking you would just go to a vote. I understand sometimes you may not do that, but it seems like we don't have a lot of time together. It may be that some of the questions that come up need some resolution relatively quickly. So anyway, I guess that's kind of what I was thinking as I looked at what you're proposing here.
Mhm.
Just a thought.
Yeah, and we could change that for simplicity's sake. Are others, can I see a thumbs up or thumbs sideways to just change consensus here to striving for full consensus, and then having that second bullet point there still of voting if need be? Okay, I see Karin, do you have a point on that?
Just that if a proposal comes forward and it doesn't reach consensus, to then immediately go to the voting without an opportunity to try and resolve that lack of consensus, then we're just voting. So unless there's a cycle in the middle between those two steps that allows us to agree, then we should just go with a majority vote structure, I think.
Okay. So I hear both those points. Yeah, Lynn.
I think the sort of thought here, Karen, it was yes, what both of you have just said is, makes sense. It's sort of our fallback to like we can do a majority vote if absolutely needed. Sort of the thinking was, let's strive for absolute consensus. Let's set consensus -1 as like an acceptable kind of bar and get there. And if all else fails, and there is really truly just two options, because sometimes there won't necessarily be two options. We kind of need to find a way. But if truly we're just deciding between two things and we're divided, then it sort of leaves Alex an opening to, okay, let's take a step back and we just need to get through this. So I think, does that kind of mirror what you were what you were expecting or proposing?
Yeah, and perhaps I didn't hit that point hard enough of really striving for consensus as our first priority, and then consensus -1 being acceptable for more complex decisions. Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like maybe with those clarifications, does that help resolve your question or the point that you brought up, Ken?
Well, it does. I don't know that I really had much of a question. I was just, I'm fine with what we just said of striving for consensus. And I guess I'm just, in the event that there is a timing issue and we need to make a decision, I think striving for consensus with the idea of then looking to vote.
Yeah.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay, great, thank you. So as demonstration of that, we are hitting our time for this conversation. So let's put this to a thumbs up, thumbs sideways, which kind of feels like voting, but it's my favorite way to get a gauge of whether there is consensus in the room on this proposal. And thumb sideways is perfectly fine. It just means we might need a little bit more conversation. But I think that, let's see, Heather, did I see your thumb? Okay, perfect. Thank you all. Terrific. So I will stop sharing my screen now, and I am going to pass it over to Terry and Sophie, who are going to talk a little bit more about how the review panel fits into the context of the city's overall public engagement plan, and then talk a little bit more about kind of the scope of this panel's decision making.
So I think Sophie is going to share a piece or two from the approved public involvement plan. And then if I could have a minute after that to just mention a couple things that came up with our meeting last night with boards and commissions, that would be fantastic. Okay.
I'm going to share my screen. I'll just leave it out of presentation mode, but if it bothers anybody, let me know. So this is just to give you an overall view of our project structure and who we're reaching out to and what role everybody has in this process. This is included in one of the fact sheets that I sent out to you. So the key stakeholder groups are the Healthy Democracy Panel, and the steering committee is rolled into that. Then we have an equity panel, a boards and commissions roundtable, and a local partners roundtable. Then of course we have all of the community members. And then these two groups will advise the Planning Commission, who will advise City Council, who ultimately will make the final decision. Kind of coordinating all of this in the middle is City of Eugene staff. So we are going to be looking to DLCD for the established guidelines for compliance with the House bill. We're also advising and collaborating with agency experts. And then we have our technical consultants that we've hired on, but just wanted to show you where you are up here in the top left. And then I wanted to fairly quickly just review what the next few months looks like throughout this first phase of establishing guiding values and principles for the project. So last night we had our first boards and commissions roundtable, which Sherry will talk about. Tonight we're doing it again, but with the local partners, actually a couple of you that are here now. As you well know now, we're also doing the Healthy Democracy panel. So the steering committee meetings are ongoing. Tomorrow we have our lottery event for choosing the Healthy Democracy panelists, and then they'll have 9 meetings throughout December. We will also be holding a few equity roundtable meetings. I'm working with a group of 4 undergraduates at the university to do some student outreach, so they're with us for the term. Then on November 12th and 13th, the Land Conservation and Development Commission will be seeing the latest iteration of the proposed rules for House Bill 2001 and possibly adopt them on those days. And then at the very end of this all, we're going to go to Planning Commission on December 14th to let them know what we've heard from everyone during this phase. And then the next phase starts in early 2021. Does anybody have any questions? I see Carolyn.
I'm just wondering, who's on the equity roundtable or equity panel?
That's a good question. So on the public involvement plan, we have a list of folks that we're planning to reach out to. We just finalized our contract with our facilitator for that. So outreach is ongoing right now, but we should know fairly soon what that final list is, and we can share it with you.
Okay.
Sophie, I'm wondering if you could speak just a little bit, and maybe this is what you're planning, Terry. Feel free to let me know. But can you speak a little bit to how the review panel uniquely fits in to the puzzle of this overall plan? Kind of what its unique value is?
Absolutely. Were there any other questions for Sophie, or are we good? Okay. Great. That's a good lead in, because I think it's tied to the questions we had last week about the purpose and benefit of the Healthy Democracy panel. So we talked about it amongst staff after the last meeting and tried to boil it down to a couple of bullet points. And what I wrote down is the main purpose from my perspective is to expand representation of people involved in public policy making. Secondly, to collect concerns and hopes from all corners of Eugene. And thirdly, to engage more and more types of people in planning processes and into the future. So that is distinct from the other 3 groups that we're talking about. The equity panel is specifically geared towards equity-based organizations that do work around different marginalized communities. So there's BIPOC leaders, that's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. There's separately the NAACP, GLAAD, and the LGBTQ plus community, organization that represents folks with disabilities. And so that's the kinds of folks that are being invited to serve on the equity panel. And that follows the model that we used for the Climate Action Plan 2.0 process. Then the other kind of 2 big groups that Sophie showed you in the decision-making structure were the boards and commissions and local partners. And so we started that group last night with boards and commissions. 3 of you that are here had colleagues, not yourselves, but representing the same groups at that meeting. And the things that came up that I wanted to just mention to you all because they relate to our purpose in guiding the Healthy Democracy panel were a couple of points around the issue that came up around how much flexibility do we have and how do we respond to the minimum standards that are coming out from the state. So I don't have to get into this technical point, but I just want to let you know that we did talk a little bit about the different approaches to implementing more middle housing across more of Eugene. The state committee started looking at two different ways of looking at that, a balloon approach and a whittle away approach. And so I'm sure we'll get more into that, but I described that for the committee last night. And then we discussed how the minimum standards are a floor and establish what cities are required to implement, but they don't serve as a ceiling. So part of our work is to collect concerns and hopes from all of these different groups, feed those into guiding principles, and then use those guiding principles to help us judge whether the code and policy proposals that are coming out of the project are meeting the needs of the community and meeting those principles. So I know I packed a lot of stuff in those statements, but those were some of my kind of key takeaways from our meeting last week, and then running through the first kind of group meeting last evening. So we have a couple tweaks to our presentation, and then tonight we'll be meeting with the local partners.
Great, thanks, Terry. Any questions about that?
Will these, the list of people who you're meeting with be made public? Or will you share that with us?
Yes, with one caveat that the actual panelists for Healthy Democracy are being identified by first name only, is my understanding. But the names of folks who participate on the other panels, I believe, are public. I'm scratching my head a little bit because the group that met last night are all appointed officials. And so that, no problem. The local partners, I don't think there would be any problem with publishing that either. Sophie, you can check my thinking on that.
Yeah, and all of the organizations that they represent are listed in the plan, and all meetings are recorded and published to our public meetings YouTube afterwards. And I have links on all of our web pages for folks to watch live if they would like.
Thank you.
I think, Carolyn, I saw your hand.
No, I was just going to say, well, of course, the names have to be considered public because anybody can join the Zoom and watch the meeting and see who's there. So they're obviously available to the public.
Thank you. Okay, terrific. And so the last piece that I wanted to touch on here is invite Lynn just to talk on the same theme of kind of the unique value of a review panel style process, you know, as we can think about that in the ecosystem of this whole public involvement plan.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I was unsure after last meeting if I had done a good job of this. So hopefully, and I think it's important to sort of our work on this committee such that we sort of make decisions that reinforce some of help to get us as close as possible, sort of some of the core values of this kind of method. And so I wanted to tell you sort of the two main aspects that make this kind of thing unique. You've heard about one of them, the sort of new voices in the room, and then I'm going to speak a little bit about what happens in the room as well. They're both sort of unique from other processes, we think, at least. And overall, both it's all sort of with the overall intention to connect the general public to a decision-making structure in a new kind of way, a new kind of infrastructure, and particularly one that is sort of innovating on how we've been doing democracy before, for the purpose of handling our most complex and contentious political issues in a different kind of way. So that's kind of the overall idea here. And I think it's, you know, we, as I mentioned last time, are very much independent of the city, but you know, won't speak to any other part of the process or anything like that. But just speaking to this process, one thing that we're really excited about is the willingness of the city so far, at least, to sort of put themselves out there to have everyday folks randomly selected do quite a visible part of this evaluation, and then to set it up in such a way where the panel not only proposes principles, but comes back a couple months later and evaluates the work that's been done against those principles, and then actually does it again in a second feedback loop. So that's you know, they're sort of opening themselves up to a certain amount of potential criticism, but our pitch is that kind of openness also allows for a level of kind of credibility. So anyway, that's kind of one of the core values actually is sort of legitimacy in the eyes of the public, credible, radically transparent processes with accountability before, that's us here, during, that's also us, and after the process, and to some extent that will be the panel as well, doing follow-up on their own decisions in those feedback loops. And it's one of the other core values that I wanted to sort of make a case for is the idea of panelists as being on the dais. That is what we generally say, but that just means sort of making as many of the decisions about their process themselves and the things about it as possible. They're the ones that have sort of the legitimacy through this random representative selection process, not people like me, and so they should be in positions of power in this process. To some extent, this group needs to make some decisions sort of before that and potentially resolve conflicts if there are some, but by and large, the panel is meant to be doing its own work, and that comes down to the end when it's writing its recommendations. It's never passed through staff. Their recommendations will be in their own words, every single word, typos and all. And from our perspective as staff, it's a little bit of a change of paradigm from a typical public engagement process where the everyday folks sort of on a panel or on a committee are kind of serving the staff and giving advice to staff. Of course, in this case, their purpose is to give advice to staff, but in terms of the ethos of the process, we as staff are here to serve the panel instead of the other way around. So it's not an extractive process. It is the panel doing important work to come to negotiated solutions, and us, you know, providing as best a container as we can to help them do that. So that's our main job here, is to help provide that sort of credible container. One more thing to mention real fast about the in-room process. So the selection process, you know, is really different, and please come and view it tomorrow. It's going to be live, 1 p.m. on the Huge Planning Facebook page. And the mayor is going to say a couple words, and Terry and I are going to chit-chat a little bit, and then we're going to actually hit the button and run the thing, and it's going to be very exciting. But the other really unique thing about these is the deliberation that happens in the room, and not only because panelists are in this sort of unique position of power within their own process, but because there's an ethos of deliberation rather than debate. So collaboration whenever possible, not forcing consensus, but getting as close as possible, allowing for minority reports 100%, but trying, and especially this is key for our work today, putting the panel on one side of the table together, metaphorically, looking at the problem on the other side, not on opposite sides of the table, looking at the problem between them and arguing. That's the kind of paradigm shift that we're trying to do there, which impacts, if I may, Alex, on our sort of next mission today, and how the process proposal was set up. And let me just share my screen really fast to show what that looked like. Here we go.
As you're doing that, Lynn, do you think that piece will be doable in two or 3 minutes? I know we're running a little bit behind on the expert brainstorm. Great.
Good call. Fair enough. Yes, absolutely. It'll be really fast. So so the only thing that I really want to get across here, I'll send this. This is what we looked at last time. We're not going to talk about the process this time. Again, we're going to talk about it next week. Come back to it with some more details. But basically, the theory here is that the panel is in a collaborative, 100% collaborative mode for the first 2 weeks, 2 phases, first 6 sessions, where they're not making decisions about sort of what the principles should be yet, but rather just sort of understanding what this complex issue is in the first week and understanding what their own experiences are and how that might relate. And then in the second week, hearing from folks who might have more positions on the issue. So the idea, and this is how the Citizens Initiative Review is set up as well, where the panel is sort of presented with experts who just provide background, the terminology that's being used and sort of the history or context or just some of this background stuff that is hopefully not terribly controversial that we can agree on as a committee here, hopefully, but then have space not very long after that for stakeholders or other experts, folks who might have just other things to say, including opinionated things. But by that point, the panel will sort of be used to, receiving testimony together and collecting information together. So that's kind of the setup. And then bringing that into the third phase where, okay, now at this point, they've been on this, they now have to sort of negotiate with each other a little bit, but hopefully they will have been in many sessions together by that point and will be used to sort of working together. So hopefully we'll be sort of ready to do that. So that's kind of the theory I wanted to go over. Thanks, Alex.
Excellent. Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, so this is setting us up for the conversation for the next 20 or so minutes about actually generating ideas for those phase 1 experts. And so the last thing I wanted you to kind of set us up with, Lynn, is as we look at that process outline, can you remind the steering committee of what the parameters are for the experts in phase 1 of the project? Kind of our timing parameters, and then our goal of, brainstorming today. Maybe you could talk a little bit about Sarah's role briefly as well.
Good call. Yeah. So we have 3 sessions that first phase, total of 7.5 total work hours for the panel. That's not that much time. We're aiming for 3 panels of experts that first week. 2 to 3 panels, I should say, of experts. And panels of experts are really nice because the experts can kind of feed off each other, especially in a situation where the panel itself won't know much about this topic at all. The panelists can kind of, the experts can kind of riff off each other a little bit and provide a little diversity of not opinion necessarily here, but at least just sort of background on whatever their sort of areas of expertise are. So I think we said our sort of aim for this first week or first phase is 4 to 9 experts that we're looking for. Hopefully we will identify more than that here. Well, first we're going to identify categories of categories of potential expertise that's really background expertise. As a reminder, what we're looking for here. We'll get to the stakeholders and other folks in a following meeting where we'll put together a menu for the panel to select those. But for right now, we're looking for folks that can just, if you were coming in off the street and knew nothing about this topic, what are the different categories that we need to know? And then identify some individuals there. And then Alex mentioned Sarah Giles, who's the person who's worked with us for a long time at the National Policy Consensus Center at Portland State, and is sort of our expert wrangler. So she will take your list and go away and go down it in priority order according to what has the sort of most support. In all these different categories that you've decided on, and go and actually find those individuals. And the reason why we need maybe a few more people than just 4 to 9 is that the timeline is tight, and it's going to be tight the next round as well. We're talking about stakeholders. So she may, people might be busy or already and not be able to speak that first week. So a few more options will be great. And at the end, I should say, so our aim today is to get to a list, to get to these categories, and then to get to some names in those categories. It doesn't have to be a 100% complete list. We'll try to get as far as we can. And then at the end of the meeting today, I will be creating a Google form with all that stuff in it. And we'll sort of do our are voting after the meeting in that form, because it's really time consuming to do that. So, and this vote will be who is sort of acceptable as an expert. Yeah, to everybody. Hopefully we'll get a bunch of people that are acceptable to all of us, or almost all of us, as sort of background experts, because we're not looking for hopefully really controversial stuff here.
Great. Perfect. Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate you setting us up, and I am going to share my screen. So as Lynn mentioned, our first task here is to come up with just a few categories of experts that we might include in this phase 1 for the panel. Oops, it's actually up here. So you can just, let's see if this works to just speak without raising your hand, so I can be typing and not keeping close tabs on the queue. Let's see if that works out.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Experts on what item? Like 2001 or code, or what?
Yeah, so I think the broad question here is, what does the Eugene Review Panel need to know in order to accomplish their task, which is deciding the principles guiding the city's decision on HB 2001. So yeah, Lynn, you have a point there.
And specifically at this stage, we're just looking for the background information, the kind of contextual information, things like, well, Sarah has suggested a couple, maybe I'll just throw them in here since she's not here. She'll be at the next meeting. Things like historical context in Oregon, the technical details of HB 2001, zoning codes, language and terminology, planning 101 as it relates to housing and land use, these kind of things. Just as a sort of a feed from her.
Do you want me to capture those, Lynn? Could you repeat those?
Sure. Yeah. I suppose that's maybe not a bad starting place, and they can be, historical context in Oregon. I said sort of planning 101 as it relates to housing, technical specs of HB 2001.
I apologize, everybody. My computer is being very slow, so the typing is going to be a bit delayed. Okay.
Great. I don't know, maybe I mentioned something else, I forget. Yeah.
Okay. Karen has her hand.
Yeah, Karen, go for it.
Sure. I was just with that framing you offered, I think looking at the purpose of the law and then the object of the law would be a good idea. So one category would be addressing exclusionary zoning practices and the history of that. A related category would be the affordability and the inaffordability of our current housing options, because those two are specifically called out as the purpose or the issue, some of the issues the law is trying to address. And then third would be missing middle housing types. So understanding what it is that we're even talking about as the object. And I have thoughts about people who might be related to each of those, but those are three topics that come to mind, or categories, I guess.
I think also accurate demographics about the community that we're putting this in place for. And maybe the demographics would include ALICE reporting or income.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So these are, I think these are good starting places, and I'm wondering if we can also start to maybe lump these together into kind of, we're looking for just broad buckets at this point, and then we'll start to brainstorm kind of types of specific individuals or specific individuals' names. And so I guess as we go here, and I realize that we're tight on time today. So are there any of these that are currently up that could be combined into the same very general bucket at this point?
I have a quick suggestion. I think the name planning 101 is well intentioned, but implies that planning is very simple and would be like a 101 class. So may I suggest the wording introduction to planning?
You may, thank you.
Appreciate that.
Great. I'm wondering if understanding housing types here might go under introduction to planning.
How long is your meeting?
Can you ask that again?
How long is the meeting? 90 minutes? With breaks?
Sorry, the meeting of the panel.
Mm-hmm. Like we're putting these into categories, but if the categories are enormous, there's no way to reach the information they might need to feel informed.
Yeah, so I think that we're thinking about these as themes just to guide our brainstorm today more than anything. So not that we need to articulate exactly what the panel will cover, but this is more just setting us up to get a big list of names down on paper by the end of this meeting.
I would say separating planning from housing is actually critical to this project because this is about implementation, not long-range planning and our kind of long distant future casting of land use, but figuring out what to do in the near term.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. I saw a couple other hands. I believe one of them was Lisa, and then we've got Ed on deck.
Yes, I was curious if the goal was to complete this activity today or if we were going to continue to work on it next time as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my sense, given our timing right now, is that the categories, I think we should come back to and hone a little bit more next week. So I'd say this list does not have to be perfect at the end of this meeting. What we do need, just for timing's sake, is the list of names that we can start to reach out to. So I think let's finish this conversation, put a pin in this, and then spend some time brainstorming names. Yeah. And
add a category.
Yeah, I think we had Ed first, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
After reading what's on the screen, the two experts that I could recommend are both on the panel, and it'd be Corinne and Terry.
Okay, great. So we'll move just in a moment to names, and then we'll populate a whole list of names together. So thank you. If you could just hold those till the next exercise. And Terry.
I was going to suggest adding a category around fair housing and equity in housing.
Okay. And Sophie?
I would like to suggest a category that's like introduction to city structure, process, and decision making. I think this will be a lot of folks' first time interacting with the city, knowing who makes decisions, who's elected, who's appointed, how do things work.
Great, thank you. Okay, so, Heather, you have the last word.
Just if there could be something about the current barriers to implementation or the reasons why it hasn't been implemented already.
Okay. Great, thank you all. And yeah, I think what I want to propose is that we revisit this list next week and kind of continue to hone what these categories are, what the charge of these initial expert panels will be. But just for the sake of time, we're going to ask everybody to spend 2 or 3 minutes right now, just with a pen and paper silently, and taking kind of all of these categories into consideration, populate a list of everybody you can think of. And this is as wide a net as you want to cast. They don't have to be geographically specific. Anybody you can think of who you think could speak to topics that the review panel needs to know in their first phase of work together. And then we will come back together, and if you want to write them in the chat, it'll help me kind of transfer them into our brainstorm document, or you can read them aloud. But let's for now take until 1:54, pen and paper, brainstorm as many people as you can think of. Great.
Oh, Alex, just an addendum
Yes.
that it can be people or types of person.
Thank you. We thought of that
Right.
at exactly the same moment. Yeah.
Thank
Thank you. Yeah. So if you, it can be a type of individual too. So someone in this profession or somebody who works at that institution. If you don't know an exact name, we can track down the name. Okay, great. So it's 1:54. Does anyone need one more minute? You can raise your hand if you do. Yeah, okay. I know this is short and we really do want to give you space to think creatively. So let's take till 1:55. Okay, terrific. So thank you all for putting some of these in the chat. And for those of you who instead wrote them down, I'll be able to copy them over from the chat in a moment. But for any that aren't currently represented there, can you read the names aloud, and I will document them. Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
Bill Close, Michael Reeder, Carol Schumer.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to ask you to spell some last names for me. Bill Cloves.
Cloos. Michael Reeder, Carol Schumer. I'm going to have to look that one up. I'm not sure. Rick Satry, Satrie. Renee Clough. That's it.
Renee. Okay. I'm just doing terribly on these last names, so I apologize. But for the sake of getting people down here, we can confirm some spellings with you later if need be.
I'll get them in chat.
Okay, that'd be great. Anyone else want to add names here that were not in the chat yet? Go ahead.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm not really adding a name so much. I'm thinking in terms of this being like a phase one, as we were talking about a bit ago, and getting people on the panel early on grounded. So I think of it kind of getting started. I'm thinking there's city staff, probably several people, and Terry and Sophie can, I guess, populate this, but it seems like they would be from planning. I'm also thinking maybe somebody from legal. Maybe that's Lauren to really, there's got to be some discussion of HB 2001 and the purpose and all of that. And then the other thing, and I guess this would be just a follow up with what Ed said. I'd also noted the whole area of private planning around the city and all of the people who work in that.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? Okay. I really appreciate you throwing them in chat because that saves us a lot of time here. Yeah.
A quick question here on just on your process, because I know we're running out of time. I'm just verifying. Yeah, you guys are going to send out this list for us to be able to review, and also maybe send out all the stuff that's been entered into the chat so we can.
Yeah,
can you
exactly.
do that?
Yep. Yeah. So thank you. That's what I was just about to move to, is that
Okay.
we will, yeah, particularly since the chat needs to be public information, we will move all the information there into this document. And then our decision-making process for this piece is that Lynn will create a Google form, like you mentioned, with all of the names that we've generated today. And then our idea is to, instead of spending a bunch of time prioritizing them, because that would be a very, very long process, is just to have kind of an approval process. So all of you, by filling out the Google form, the intention will be to just give your stamp of approval to every single name who you would feel comfortable and good presenting to the panel in this first phase. So, oh, I think somebody might need to mute. I'm hearing my own voice. Great, that's better, thank you. So when you get the Google form after we get off today, I think Lynn will have it out sometime this afternoon or evening. You'll go through and choose as many of these names as you can. So the process is not to choose your favorite or the best ones, but really anyone that you would feel comfortable and good about, you know, giving your endorsement. And then the way that we'll rank the list so that Sarah knows who to contact first is just, you know, in order of how many of our steering committee members approved that person. So ideally, you know, she's only reaching out to people who have unanimous support. That could be possible, and that would be fantastic. So does that process make sense? Any questions about how we'll make that decision? The biggest part of that decision is just who's available. Yeah.
I just need to say that I need to go. I have a parent conference starting in 2 minutes, and so I will be exiting the meeting, and appreciated being here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. And unless you wanted to add one more thing, Lynn, I think that is all that we need to cover. We'll capture everything that's in the chat, and we'll do more on process next week. Yeah, was that a yes, Lynn?
Yeah, let me just reiterate one more thing that you said earlier, which was just that this isn't the last chance with these experts, and we haven't even gotten to the second batch of folks who are going to present. So, but it will at least give Sarah, you know, some names to start calling. So that's great. But it's not the end of the road.
Yeah. And apologies that this was rushed, but we will revisit this. Great. Okay, thanks everybody so much. And like I just said briefly, next week we will we'll be sending you that process outline between now and next Thursday, and we will touch more on the actual nuts and bolts of the process with you all next week. Okay, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Thursday.
You all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.